so much. I love you so much. I love you so much. I love you so much.
Hello, all you positive heads out there. Thanks for tuning your beautiful brainwaves into another episode of the Positive Head Podcast, where we are firmly convinced that creating success and happiness is rooted in understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the fact that as human beings, we are all immensely powerful fractals of the one and only source consciousness, which creates and animates all things. Now, of course, understanding this powerful truth is one thing. Applying this incredibly empowering wisdom to everyday life, well, that's another, which is exactly why we provide you with a fresh serving of soul food for thought 5 days a week to help constantly remind you of what matters most. You are it. And I'm your host, Brandon Beecham. I'm the one who will be here with you each and every Wednesday, interviewing a different consciousness changemaker that is also out there working tirelessly to help catalyze change and expand awareness all across spaceship Earth. On the other 4 weekdays, you can hear me discussing topics such as my favorite thought-provoking quotes, reading and discussing wisdom from empowering books, playing clips from various inspirational spiritual teachers, sharing a bit of mysterious news, taking questions from the audience, and essentially digging into any other mind-expansive topics that will help keep your soul fed by tuning you into positive vibrations on a consistent basis. And you guys have heard me say that if I ever run ads on this show, it will only be with a company that I fully support because I believe their intention is to make a positive difference in the world. Well, I'm pleased to announce that day has arrived and that this episode of the Positive Head Podcast is being brought to you thanks to the support of Gaia. If you're not familiar, Gaia is the go-to source for streaming consciousness content online, and you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. All right, all you positive heads. On this week's interview episode, I'm very happy to have Christian de la Huerta here with me on the show. Christian is an author and coach that teaches the incredible power of breath work. Hello there, Christian. Welcome to the show, my friend.
Hey, Brandon. Glad to be here. Very grateful to be on the show.
Yeah, likewise. It's funny because this is one that's been coming up for me a lot, just sort of subconsciously, the whole, idea of breath work and practicing breath work. And only within the last maybe month or 6 weeks or so, I've started doing a very quick chakra opening meditation where I focus on my breath in that process before I record each day. So very excited to dig in, pick your brain about this fascinating subject. Before I do, I'd like to start with the same question I start with everyone that I interview, and that is, you're in an elevator. The guy next to you looks over, says, "What's your passion?" You got 10 floors to answer. What do you say?
Well, I think I'll answer that in the sense what drives me the most, what my sole purpose is, and that is to play a role and do whatever I can to support humanity's awakening at this particular time. To me, it feels like we're at the most critical juncture in our collective evolution. You could even say make it or break it point. I think the planet's going to be fine. It might take a couple of million years, but it'll find homeostasis again and life will continue in some form. Whether we make it, we're certainly not out of the woods yet. And certainly now just beginning to witness whatever it is that we have unleashed on the environment. So, I've been saying for years, all hands on deck. And now it's really all hands on deck. If
right.
any of us who have the slightest suspicion that we have work to do in terms of teaching, healing, getting the message out there as you are, this is it. This is the time that we've been waiting for.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. It is. It appears to be a crucial juncture in our evolution, as a species, and you have so many different energies bubbling up at the same time, vying for sort of attention, right?
Yep. Yeah.
So it's great to connect with you, and certainly excited to hear about your your perspective on we can all help to create homeostasis, healing, and so forth on this planet with ourselves, with others. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and what's your story? Who's Christian?
Well, I was born in Cuba, at the time of the revolution. So I lived under Castro, under a communist regime for the first 10 years of my life. Then came to the States, where I've been since majority of my life. Degree in psychology. My dad was a psychiatrist, so I came out of that kind of psychotherapeutic tradition. And almost 30 years ago, I discovered breathwork, and that opened up. It changed my life. Like even the first session that I ever did, I knew that I would never be the same. I knew I had to do it again. I didn't care what I had to do, what it cost, or where I had to go, and I knew that I had to make it available to others because it works so fast and heals in so many ways so profoundly. So it's been almost 30 years now that I've been teaching that and teach it all over the world. With very effective results. It just works. And I know it sounds too good to be true. And to my logical mind, even 30 years into it, when I think about or hear myself speaking about how it works and that it heals at so many levels, not only mentally and emotionally and psychologically, but also spiritually and even physically, just from breathing.
Right.
I realize it sounds too good to be true, but it works.
Well, they say the simplest solution is often the best solution, right? And that's the thing about it. It sounds like such a simple thing, and of course, it's something that we all take for granted and don't necessarily give the focus and attention that it deserves. I think you would agree with.
Yeah, and it's so simple. And if we think about it, first thing that we do when the emotions come up, if they're scary emotions, or we're like about to face an upset, or where fear comes up, or anger comes up, or even sadness, the first thing we do is like stop breathing. We shut the breath down. We start breathing right, and that's what anchors.
Which is the opposite of what we should be doing, right?
Exactly. If we will have the presence of mind just to continue breathing deeply through those emotions, then they don't get lodged in our body, and we don't have to carry, years, and in some of our cases, decades of unexpressed, suppressed emotional crap.
Right. Well, why don't you give us the broad overview, or the detailed overview, if you will? We've got some time here about breath and sort of touching on how we can utilize it, a deeper understanding of its power and potential, both physically, emotionally, spiritually, to improve our lives.
Sure. And one way to begin to think about, and this might even help some of us understand why it works, as simple as it is. In most spiritual traditions in the world, the word for spirit and breath is the same. So the same word can mean breath or spirit, depending on how it's used, depending on the context.
Right.
So possibly that helps understand why it works so effectively. There's a lot of different types of breathing modalities, different practices, pranayama in yoga classes that I imagine a lot of your listeners would be familiar with that term. The particular type of breathwork that I'm talking about is different. It is a type of pranayama, or it is a yoga practice, yogic breathing practice, but it's different than the one that most of us know from yoga class. So this one is done for about an hour, so it's much longer.
Oh, wow.
It's a circular connected breath, and in and out the mouth, and it's incredibly powerful. As I said before, not only does it heal, and that would be enough at all those levels, but it also brings about some of the most amazing, profound spiritual experiences that I have ever had, and I have witnessed countless people have over, thousands of people have over the last few decades.
It's interesting that you bring that up. Just interject real quick because,
Sure.
I do daily shows 4 days a week and then one interview on Wednesdays. And, the last topic was a question. I take a lot of questions from listeners was, hey, am I spiritually mute? People talk about these spirit guide experiences and all these fascinating meditative, out of body experiences, so forth, so on. And so I addressed that person yesterday in the daily episode. And so it's interesting that you mentioned that as something, because it really has been something. I haven't done a lot of breath work in my life, but it's something that, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I've been doing a chakra opening meditation every time before I turn on the microphone. And
Beautiful.
just those 2 minutes of deep breathing, I feel such a natural high and calmness and joy. And I could see how your first experience with it, you would say, oh man, I'm addicted. I got to do this. So I can only imagine, an hour-long practice. And I think it's very interesting that you said it can lead to those sorts of experiences. Yet another way that maybe a lot of listeners haven't thought of as a path to open up to, those sort of spiritual, profound experience that I think a lot of my listeners probably long for.
Yes, exactly. And you're right. Even a 2-minute conscious breathing a day, or doing it intentionally right before a difficult meeting or an important meeting or a difficult conversation, it's life-changing. As simple as that. Great way to handle stress, to handle just the stress of life that so many of us walk around in. Right. And then this longer practice that we're talking about, it's really profoundly life-changing. I can just tell you so many stories of even physical healing, like things that the little mind that wants to figure it all out and understand how it works really can't wrap its mind around it.
Right. What is the process? Can you explain the process of this? This hour long. Yeah. Is it?
It's as simple as that. You breathe in a circular way. It's like I don't recommend that somebody like one of your listeners would just pick it up and do it on their own, because it's pretty powerful. It's good to have somebody present, professional, somebody who's been trained.
Really? Wow.
Present. Yeah. Once you do, 5 or 10 sessions, then you can be taught how to do it yourself. But people have profound cathartic moments.
Wow.
And people have, past traumas come up. People, stuff.
So it's something that it's not something. It's such a powerful experience. You think there's a danger in doing it on your own, or you just won't be prepared to. To handle sort of the things that come up on your own, or that's an interesting perspective, because of course that does add a layer of difficulty, unlike meditation or whatever. I can go and practice alone, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't, people have asked me over the years, well, can't you do a recording and put it up on the web or something, or at least an audio version guiding people through the experience? And I've never done it because I don't know what's inside of somebody's psyche, somebody's mind.
Right.
So it's important for me to be there physically, or somebody, who has been trained. So a lot of it is creating the psychologically safe space, so that the stuff that's been suppressed or repressed, the emotions that have been stuffed down in there, so that there's a safe container for it to emerge. Once I have personally have a chance to see somebody breathe for the first time, then I can engage. Yes, would I feel comfortable teaching you how to do it yourself? Which is, the practice itself, how to do it, is pretty simple. But that, I would rather be either myself or somebody that's trained with me, or there's different modalities that people that I would recommend they go to first before they try it on their own.
Interesting. Yeah. And what are the, I've been hearing some, hearing about different modalities. I know quite a few times lately in my circle, the individual, I'm sure you've heard of him before, Wim Hof, has come up, the Iceman.
Yes.
And he has some breathing techniques that that's been coming up almost daily in the last week for me. People either recommending that I bring him on the show, or, check this out, check out the breathing techniques, or, and then you hear of holotropic breathing. So, curious what these different modalities are and how they differ in the experience, compared to, is there a particular name that you give the type of breathing that you recommend? The style?
I was trained as one of the original form of it when they came up with it, when it was discovered kind of by accident here in the West by a man by the name of Leonard Orr, who was, myth has it, or the lore has it, that he was sitting in a hot tub in California experimenting with his breath, and then suddenly, boom, had this amazing expanded state of awareness. So initially they started, doing it in the hot tubs. It's still done in hot tubs occasionally, but then it was brought out to where you just do it lying on the floor, on your back and in a very relaxed pose. So I stopped using the term rebirthing a long time ago for a variety of reasons. I think it creates confusion in people's mind. That one of the reasons they called it rebirthing is because a lot of people have the experience of reliving the birth process, and I've seen that happen. Seeing even men have both sides of the birth process. Like even men have the legs come up as if they were in stirrups and experience themselves as their mother, and then experience themselves coming out, as themselves. Because if we think about it, at that point we kind of shared body and consciousness with the mother, so it's not surprising that we remember that we have a body memory of that.
Right.
But I think the word rebirthing is confusing. It creates an expectation that people should have that experience, and it's not necessary to have it. It also, people confuse it with born again Christianity, which obviously has nothing to do with.
Right.
So I've been using just a more generic breath work, and in particular soulful breath work, which is kind of my brand. Soulful Power is the name of my website. So
right, soulfulpower.com, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha. I see. And so you put on workshops and retreats and so forth where this particular technique is the focus. Is that correct?
Yes, I do a lot of different retreats and workshops on different themes. Like, for example, relationships, how to do relationships consciously, intentionally. And we haven't been taught how to do that. So
no, definitely not.
It's amazing that any relationships can work because we haven't been given the context, how to use them, how to do them intentionally, consciously. And then we haven't been taught how to clear all this accumulation of suppressed emotional crap.
Right.
Which is where the breathwork comes in. So what we end up doing in relationships is just projecting stuff onto each other, dumping all of our unhealed emotional past on each other. And so it's amazing to me that any of them work. So it's a very powerful combination in the retreat work to have the cognitive teachings, the understanding of how to hold a relationship. So like even if you already are in a relationship and you've got the basic human needs for intimacy and companionship and sex and family in some cases and all of that good stuff, then what? How do we use that relationship as a way to forward, to speed up, to advance our own process of healing and spiritual evolution, which I think is ultimately the reason that we're all here for. And then if we're not and would like to be, how do we identify the subconscious obstacles, the ways that we have allowed to sabotage our own relationships by falling in love with people who are not a match, or attracting people who are not available in some way, who live on the other side of the country, or they're already with somebody else, or they're just not there emotionally. So that subconsciously we ensure that it's not going to work out even before we get going with them. Right. But tragically then end up ensuring the very same thing we're trying to avoid, which is we end up alone. So it's not a very effective strategy. So the combination of the retreats, whether we do that or I also do stuff on personal empowerment, on women's empowerment, it's like, how do we step into power, the personal power, in a way that's not hierarchical, that's not about domination, control, force, manipulation, and that doesn't require for me to push anybody down, step on them, squelch them in order for me to prop myself up and feel powerful. I do that in a different way. I do stuff on life purpose, like what are we really doing here at a soul level, at a mission level, and how do we identify and remove the obstacles, the ways that we have allowed ourselves to play small and to sell out for the illusion of security that a biweekly paycheck provides.
Right.
And just to keep ourselves playing small. But no matter what the theme of the retreat is, there are two things that I always bring in. One is the breath work, because I have yet to come across any practice that heals as quickly as it does in as many different levels. And then I also teach about what the ego is, that part of the mind, that part of the psyche. Because if we're going to be identifying all the obstacles, whether it's to the type of relationships that we really long for and deserve to have, or a sense of personal empowerment, or a life of meaning and purpose, those obstacles all come down to one thing, which is the ego mind and how it works, and how it's been keeping us in prison, and how we break out of that. So it's a combination. The retreats are a combination of cognitive work, understanding, some really powerful, life-changing teachings, and then we do multiple sessions of breath work, which do the healing and clear those obstacles at the cellular level. Yeah.
Right. And so let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits that you've seen, with someone, taking on the practice of breath work. Of course, you've touched a little bit on that, but health-wise, you've seen a lot of healing happen. Like, are we talking about sort of miraculous healing, like instant healing, or what are some of the various benefits?
Well, it's funny to me that you use that word, because sometimes that's the only way that I can use to explain it. Miraculous,
right?
Because logically, I don't understand how it works. Not after all this time doing it. But for example, I'm working here in Denver this week, and there's a therapist, like a psychologist, who had fibromyalgia, and she did a retreat with me. And after several sessions, it was gone, and she knew. She knew that it was done. And 5 years later, she has never had one recurrence.
Wow.
Ever again. And so that it really does. And I can tell you, many, many stories about them. But here's my most powerful one, I think. It's the woman that I learned this from, who mentored me in this process. First time that she was doing a one-on-one session, at one point, she's just lying on her back, going to town, doing her breathing. And at some point, she heard the facilitator snap her fingers. And for some reason, it triggered a memory that she'd forgotten about when she was 5. And something had happened, and she got into an argument or an upset with her daddy, and she got upset, and she was going to run away from home. Went outside, got on her little bike, and she started pedaling and hit a rock or something and fell over and broke her nose and was black and blue for like 3 weeks. So at the end of the session, she turned to the woman and she goes, "Wow, how did you know to snap your fingers at that moment? Your timing was impeccable. It triggered this thing I'd forgotten about." And the woman looked at her quizzically and was like, "What are you talking about? I never snapped my fingers." And so they kept talking, and as they kept on talking, what they figured out is that what she'd heard was the cracking of the bone. And the next day, so 40 years later, she got up and looked in the mirror, and she was black and blue all over again.
Wow.
Not for 3 weeks, but for a couple of days while the bone corrected itself and the body healed itself. So it goes to show how the body retains, trauma.
Cellular memory,
Cellular memory, and how it heals itself with a simple breathing practice.
Wow. Yeah, what a fascinating example of... so few, people, I've heard similar type stories before, and it just really goes to show you that there is certainly things going on at levels that modern medicine doesn't really even acknowledge, right? In regards to the way memories are retained in the cells and our DNA, however it's working, right? As you said, I don't know exactly how it's working, but there's a lot more going on than meets the eye, and certainly what we've been taught in traditional circles. And what a fascinating story.
Fascinating. And yeah, what you're saying is totally true. I didn't even think our brightest medical minds and scientific minds really, really get how the body works.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we know some of the mechanics of it, but how it all works is like, I don't really think we understand that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was listening to your, you did a TEDx talk on
Yes.
breathing, and you talked a little bit about using the breath to stop the amygdala hijack, I think it was, that you referred to?
The amygdala hijack.
Amygdala. Sorry. Yeah. The amygdala hijack. So maybe you could, I thought that was really interesting. If you could explain that.
Sure. We tend to think of the brain as one brain, but we actually have three brains. You know, the first one is at the top of the spinal cord, the reptilian brain, that develops in humans from age 0 to 18 months. And it's the center that ensures physical survival. So, you know, it maintains the regulation of temperature in the body, keeps us breathing, keeps the heart beating, all that good stuff. Then above that, from age 2 to 6, develops what we call the mammalian brain, the limbic system, which is the center of the emotions. And then above that, it's the neocortex, what we tend to imagine and see in our mind's eye when we think of the brain. You know, it's the center for higher order thinking, strategic, you know, abstract thinking, planning.
It's the youngest part of the brain, right?
Yes, develops in us from 6. We used to think into the teens. Now we know that they don't fully develop until the mid-20s.
Oh, wow.
So for those of your listeners who've got teenagers, it's like, have fun with that, because their brains are not even fully formed yet.
Right. And take that into consideration when you're wondering, what are you thinking, right?
Yikes.
I saw Michio Kaku give a talk one time, and he touched on that. He talked about that very thing. He's like, look, guys, give your teenagers a break, right? They're not even fully developed yet.
Yeah. And so on either side of the brain, there's two little glands. Like at the point of contact, if you could draw a line between the eye and the ear where that point meets, there's two little almond-shaped glands called amygdalas. And amygdala means almond in Greek. And so they are connected to the survival mechanism. So when we receive sensory information through the eyes or the ears or smell, it first goes to the hypothalamus, which is like a router, like a computer router, which sends that information simultaneously to the thinking brain and to the amygdalas. But the neuronic pathway to the amygdalas is the shortest. So they get the information first. When they receive that information and interpret it as danger, as threat, the amygdalas react in very predictable ways: fight, flight, or freeze. And we see that response all over the animal kingdom. You know, all animals, when they feel threatened, they fight, others flee, and some of them freeze. And so we do the same. So the amygdala, it's a good thing to have. It ensures survival. But there are a couple of problems. One of them is that the reaction and the response is very, very fast, but it's not very accurate because it's so fast. And so we can't always trust its perceptions. The other problem is that the amygdala has gotten confused. So when the amygdala feels threatened in a human, in an interaction, in an argument, where physical survival is not at stake, it still reacts in those three predictable ways: fight, flight, or freeze. And further complicating the problem is that when it feels threatened, not only does it go into those three modes, the other thing that the amygdala does is it blocks the thinking. So it blocks access to the thinking brain. So now we've got a real problem. We're in DEFCON 5, like high defense mode, about ready to pounce, and we can't even think straight.
Right. When we need to the most.
When we need to the most. So that's a real problem. And so there are a couple of things about that are very interesting, because our grandmothers kind of knew intuitively. So that's called the amygdala hijack, right? Because the amygdala hijacks our ability to make a choice about how we want to handle that situation, how we want to be.
Gotcha.
And it just goes into that reactive mode. So our grandmothers, this brain science, it's only like 30 years old that we understood how this works. But our grandmothers kind of intuitively knew what we do. Like, what would they tell us? What do you do when you get upset?
Take a deep breath, right?
Take a deep breath. That's the primary thing. There are swamis in India who have that much body control that they can tell their hearts to slow down, and they will. Some of them can even mimic death. Most of us aren't there yet, and probably won't be there anytime soon. But we can all slow down the breath. It doesn't take much to slow down the breath. It's just basically a choice and a little bit of self-discipline. When we slow down the breath, the heart has no choice. The heart also has to slow down, which is the reason that we also put that into practice when we're in a stressful situation. If we slow down the breath, the heart has to slow down. As the heart slows down, then the rest of the body begins to quiet down, begins to relax. The nervous system begins to relax as well. And we can make a choice, a clean, clear choice. The other thing that our grandmother would tell us is count to 10. Right? The amygdala hijack lasts 8 to 10 seconds. Then it takes a little bit longer for the adrenaline that's been released into the system to quiet down. But the hijack itself lasts 8 to 10 seconds. So what we want to do then is buy time. And the other thing we want to do is reactivate the thinking process before it shuts down. So how do we do that? So asking questions. First of all, buy time. Like, Brandon, I really want to get through this, but I can't do it right now. I'm going to go outside. I'm going to walk around the block. I'm going to go sit by the lake, sit under a tree, calm myself down. I'll be back in 20 minutes. I'm not bolting. Right. So I affirm the relationship, and I buy myself some time to handle my brain biochemistry. Right. And then able to make a choice about how to respond, how to show up. And then ask questions. Like, Brandon, can you help me understand why you feel that way? And hopefully I really want to know. But even if I'm just buying time, do it because it works. So we can get on top of the brain biochemistry, and then ask questions that are also going to take us to a place of learning. So, like, how did I get into the situation again? If we get really honest and zoom out and look at the patterns in our life, this is not the first time that we got into this argument or this type of situation. It might be a different actor, a different player, but it's the same boring play that we've done 1,000 times. So how can I handle it differently this time, so that I can pop out of this boring, repetitive merry-go-round? And show up in a different way. What was my role in it? How did I get into it? How can I show up differently? What are the patterns? Where have I felt this way before? So we began to learn more about ourselves, and then able to intervene and act in a different way.
All right. Well, now seems like a good moment to take a quick minute to tell those of you who aren't familiar a bit about our sponsor, Gaia. I've been a big fan of Gaia for many, many years now, which is why they are the only content provider I've ever reached out to in regards to potentially supporting the Positive Head podcast. So needless to say, I'm very excited they're now supporting the show. Gaia truly is my personal go-to source for streaming consciousness content on the web. They have an incredible 7,000 plus exclusive videos covering 5,000 years of wisdom. Just to give you guys an example, on April 24th on the show Buzzsaw, Dennis McKenna, who is the brother of the world's most well-known psychonaut, Terrence McKenna, makes a guest appearance to discuss the spiritual implications and mystical experiences that psychedelic substances can induce. I mean, it'd be pretty hard to be more up my alley, right? And as you all hear me constantly say, it's a daily conscious effort to maintain an elevated vibration. And if you're looking to go deep down the rabbit hole to do so, then Gaia is the best place I know of to do it, period. And you can sign up for your first month for only 99 cents at gaia.com/positivehead. That's spelled GAIA.com/positivehead. Check it out. Very, very interesting. And, something else that you said in your talk where I first heard you on the TED Talk referring to that whole process and how we can be aware of it. And of course, sort of sidestep it. You talked about emotion being, energy in motion, and it gets stuck if we don't focus on the breath, if we don't, become aware, and sort of, the breathing process really helps to free it up.
Yes, exactly. It's like, what used to be spiritual teaching, that everything is energy. Now we know from quantum physics that it's true. Everything is energy, including our bodies, including the emotions. It's like we know scientifically there's more empty space in our bodies than actual mass. And that's the same way that the universe functions. And we also know that the emotions are also energy. And we know from physics, energy can't be destroyed. So just because at some point in our lives, or many points in our lives, we stuffed the emotions because we were afraid of confrontation or conflict, or maybe we didn't want to rock the boat of a relationship, or we were afraid that something would happen, or we might get fired if we really spoke our feelings and our what was going on with us. Just because we stuff them doesn't mean it goes away. So that's how we end up getting the layers and layers and layers and layers of emotional crap.
Right.
That until we find a way to clear it, and that's, again, the beauty of the breathwork practice, is that it clears that emotional crap quickly, and that it bypasses the mind. I can't tell you how often I hear from people who come to breathe, I thought I had forgiven so-and-so for whatever. It's like, so they thought they had in their mind. But the forgiveness that happens in the breathing practice, it's like at the heart level. And
right.
then we are truly free. And then we free them, whoever they were, and we free ourselves. Because as long as we're holding somebody else over the fire for whatever they did or didn't do, our hand is still over the fire, so we're getting burnt too.
It's like drinking poison and hoping the other person dies, right?
right. Was it the Dalai Lama who said that, or somebody said that?
Somebody said it. It's
some wise being said that.
Some wise being said it. And so a question comes up for me instantly. As you mentioned, breath work and some of the profound type of experience, even spiritual experience that people can have, during this simple process. And of course, talking about the brain and the effects on the brain. Have you done any sort of research, or is there any knowledge that you have about how this the pineal gland, which of course you hear referred to as a third eye, how this is affected by breath work?
That there isn't enough of the scientific study of it. They haven't studied like they have, for example, the effects of meditation. That there's tons and tons and years of scientific research as to how it works.
Right.
I think the breath work is next. I'm in conversation with a graduate student who is proposing that for her thesis, in psychology graduate student, and there's another connection that's being made with where it's now in the radar of some scientific minds to begin to, and I think it'd be great. I can't wait for somebody to actually study it and see what's happening in the brain when we're doing this. Right.
Wow. That's really interesting that we're that sort of unaware of something that's, in your case, having, done this sort of work for decades and seen such profound, benefit. Yet from a scientific standpoint, we have, we're still in the dark, so to speak, on what's going on. What an interesting, it really shines a light on how little we really know, right?
Yeah, that's true.
For people who are so caught up on what does the science say? What does the science say? Well, it says something different than it said 20 years ago, and it's going to probably say something different 20 years from now than it says, in the future than it says now. We're just babes in the woods where that goes, right?
Totally, man. That's so true. That is so true. Babes in the woods.
So you... another thing that stuck out to me that you mentioned in your TED Talk was you said that breath is an intelligence of its own, and that we are actually being breathed. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, and that's where it gets a little bit more into the spiritual aspects of it.
Perfect.
so it connects to what I was talking about. We're spirit and breath, and I mean, I'll speak from my own personal experience, but I see it happening all the time with others. Is where we start, I might start doing the breathing cycle, with intention, like pulling the inhale and just letting go of the exhale. But at some point, it's like the breath takes over.
Yeah.
And then the breath is running the show, and it goes in its own different speed. So sometimes it goes really, really fast and like a shallow breath, or sometimes it goes really slow and really deep, and it takes you on a journey. It takes you on a trip.
Wow.
Where, if we think about it now, is like, are we really breathing ourselves? It's a good thing that we don't have to remember to breathe. Most of us would probably forget. But in that practice, to me, it becomes undeniable that there is something breathing us, some intelligence, some force, something.
Yeah. Very fascinating. Yeah, I've heard it said that as we breathe, it's sort of like birth and death happening over and over. Like you're being born anew, and then it's sort of like, and it goes along with this idea when you look at, from a quantum physics perspective, we're popping in and out of existence constantly, right? It's like, and so as we breathe, it's like birth, death, and you're constantly being born anew, essentially, with each breath.
Yeah, and interesting that you mentioned that too, because over the years, people often will mention, that the breath, this particular breathing practice, it's very similar to Lamaze. So like this is that natural breath that women will go to, when they're about to give birth. And often people will think, that's just what my father or my mother sounded like when they were about to pass. Their breath was doing that same thing, that same rhythm. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And it's interesting that Lamaze, you talked about earlier, having a lot of people having the experience of the birthing process. So I find it interesting that's, as sort of a tie-in there. I've heard it said before, that our breath, the relationship between how much breath we take in and how much there's a relationship between how much breath we take in, how deep and how much intention is in our breath, a direct correlation to how much life circumstance or even difficult life circumstance we can handle, right? The deeper the breath, the vaster our capacity. Have you heard this comparison?
Yes, I use that almost in the same verbatim words that you express it. And I see it all the time. People that even myself, when I first started doing this, I would listen to my mentor do the demo, like show in the beginning of the intro spiel to show people how to do it. And I'd find myself thinking, wow, she sounds like a wind tunnel. I started teaching very quickly. And about a year into it, one time I was demonstrating the breath in the beginning of a session, and I realized, like it dawned on me, was like, wow, I sound like a wind tunnel. So that it really, my ability to breathe, to take in breath, and as you point to, take in life, to receive life, had already increased dramatically in even a short year.
Right. Wow. Really, really fascinating. I'm going to just keep kind of checking off the things that really jumped out in your TED Talk. Another that you mentioned that I found really fascinating, you talked about argon and how, this is something that we're breathing in and out and how it doesn't change. Can you explain that?
Yes, I love that. I learned that in the documentary I Am, which highly recommend to your listeners if they haven't seen it yet. And basically, it's by Tom Shadyac, who produced and directed the Jim Carrey movies. But this is a documentary about him, about his life. And short version of it is he had a pretty bad concussion from a bicycle accident, and he almost didn't come back from it. But when he did so with renewed sense of purpose. So he got a camera crew and went around the world and asking authors and spiritual teachers and leaders what's wrong with the world and what can we do about it. And I won't spoil how he wraps that up in a beautiful way at the end, but in the process makes some beautiful discoveries that we can also talk about, like even the heart. But the one that you bring up about the element of argon. Argon is an inert element, which means that it's immutable. It doesn't change. So unlike oxygen, that when we breathe it in, it comes out as carbon dioxide. When we breathe in argon, it comes out as this exact same boring argon.
Right.
So what that tells us that we're breathing right now, the very same argon that went through the lungs of the pterodactyl and the woolly mammoth and the saber-toothed tiger. And the very same argon that went through the lungs of the ancient Hindu masters and the ancient Hebrew prophets, 3,000 years BCE, and the same argon that went through the lungs of the Buddha and Confucius and Lao Tzu about 500 years BCE, and the very same argon that went through the lungs of the Christ and the Magdalene and Mother Mary, and all the rest of the light bringers and the truth speakers and the prophets and our greatest scientific minds and all the saints and the most brilliant artistic minds. That very same argon is going through our lungs right now.
Yeah, what a fascinating connection that you can make to these people. And yeah, I thought that was a really cool and interesting point. And so to switch topics just a little bit, you also wrote, you've written a book not too long ago called Coming Out Spiritually. Can you talk a little bit about your book?
Yeah, that book was written, I think, probably 15 years ago.
Oh, was it that far long back? I don't know why I was thinking it was within the last few years.
No, I'm almost done with another one, which is about, it's called Soulful Hero, which is about the hero's journey. Like, what does it mean to live?
I love that topic. Yeah,
like, what does it mean to live heroically in the 21st century when we don't have our horses hitched outside and our armors to wear and demons to slay, except the ones that are inside of us.
Right.
And but I'm actually going to release it first as an app. Because the harsh realities that most of us don't read, most people don't read, and our society is becoming even more ADD.
Right.
It seems like every day. So
I've got to admit it. Part of this podcast was there's so many books I want to read. I'm so busy with different entrepreneurial ventures and so forth. What a shortcut. Let me get all my favorite authors on the show, and I can get the direct download right in an hour or so from them.
And thank you because you're serving many people who like you and even like me don't have the time or don't take the time to read. So what I'm doing with the app, I'm basically breaking down the lessons into 5-10 minute at most recorded lessons, but then they're interactive. So there are homeworks, there are assignments, and it's gamified.
Cool.
Around the hero's journey, so that you get points for completing the task. And I'm not gonna talk a lot more about that now, but to go back to your other question, it's gonna do really well.
When's that gonna come out?
I'm hoping by the end of the year. Before the end of the year, we're in production mode right now, and it's moving fast, and it really is exciting. It's a very exciting project for me. And so, because I think it'll reach a lot more people than that a book will. Or could. The coming out spiritually, the basic premise of it is that it's really tragic that the gay people, LGBT people, so many of us struggle with spirituality, and no wonder. Given the fact that we confuse it with religion, with organized religion, and no wonder, given the way that we have been treated, and in many ways continue to be treated by religions all over the world. But that the irony of that, the tragedy of that, is that before the patriarchal cultures and religions, people that we today call LGBT were not only spiritually inclined, but were actually honored for the roles of spiritual service and spiritual leadership that we fulfilled all over the world. So part of the book is compiling that information, which I must have read 50 books to compile that, and synthesized it and organized it into like spiritual roles, spiritual archetypes, like mediators, scouts of consciousness, keepers of beauty, roles that, of course, not just LGBT people have played throughout history, but that we certainly play in disproportionate numbers to the overall population.
Sure.
So it's kind of both a call to action for our community to reclaim our spirituality, which it's innate to all of us. To me, it's like I go with what I forget who said it, that we're spiritual beings who happen to be having a physical experience.
Right.
For one time or many times, depending on your system of belief.
Yeah, not physical beings just striving for a spiritual experience, the other way around, or when you get to the base of the situation.
Exactly. And so, like many of us, we have rejected parts of our humanity, whether it's our sexuality or our spirituality, just parts of being human. So for me, it's really critical that we reclaim all those parts of our rejected humanity, and that we find a way of expressing it that is a match, that works for us.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. And being exposed to organized religion as a child and a lot of very conservative thinking, it is it's just wild to me how much organized religion, and thankfully it seems to be shifting a little bit, but so much of it still viewing someone who's homosexual as broken or wrong or needing to be fixed. And it's like, could it be more apparent that people are born this way? It's I mean, they can even see the difference in the brain chemistry, right? And it's yet we have these. I can think of my own father. He's a great guy. He's just locked into this archaic idea of religion, and there's something. It's all judgmental and not. It's just like a not understanding. Thank goodness it's shifting, but I imagine for a lot of gay individuals that the spiritual piece, when you look at how it's organized religion has looked at homosexuality, it's had to be confusing, just another layer of confusion. So I think it's really fascinating that and a wonderful idea that you wrote a book that addresses just that.
Yeah, and if it was only that, if it was only confusing, or if it was only like growing up thinking that you're broken or being told that there's something wrong with you, then it wouldn't be quite so bad. It's like what we're being told is that we are an abomination in the eyes of God.
That's going to be tortured for eternity.
For eternity.
Not just a billion years, and then you get to try again, right?
Yeah.
But God loves you.
Yeah. And so how do you reconcile that? How do you reconcile? Like in my case, I always had this desire to serve the sacred, God as I understood it then. I was raised in a very Catholic environment. But so trying to reconcile that with being told that I'm an abomination.
Right.
So my adolescence was one long depression with suicidal thoughts.
Wow.
And that's, one of the reasons why the rate of suicide among LGBT youth is so much higher than their heterosexual counterparts. Because it's really a fundamental existential question that we have to struggle with.
Right. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of progress from your childhood to now. Obviously, there's still plenty more work to do, but I would imagine
it's amazing, the progress, and some of those advances are being threatened right now by the current administration.
Yeah, right, right.
And
two steps forward, one step back, right?
Yeah. And then the other connection that's interesting to make around that is that, to me, because what's ironic about that is that before the patriarchal cultures, also that's when we started having the split between the sexual and the spiritual, and that's when we started demonizing sexuality and animalizing the body. In the times where the goddess was honored and the sacred feminine was honored and women were honored, that split wasn't there. Like sexuality was considered a very valid path to the sacred, to union. And in some of the Eastern religions, Taoism and the tantric traditions, they still they still teach that. And in some of the indigenous traditions, that split doesn't exist. They consider everything sacred, including the fish and the birds and the creepy crawlies and the stones and the trees and the genitals. But even if we're gonna go by the Western religions that tell us that God is everywhere, omnipresent. But then, don't tell me that God is everywhere except for the bedroom and the genitals.
Right.
God,
meanwhile, that's how life exists thanks to that process. Like how ironic, right?
Yeah. And then the whole other thing about misogyny, if we really think about it, misogyny and homophobia are two sides of the same coin.
Right.
And I think the more that I think about it, which is the reason that I've been doing this work with empowerment, and particular women's empowerment, is that the deeper one is misogyny. Because, like, take for example, some of the biblical prohibitions that condemn, that were interpreted, because a lot of this stuff was misinterpreted, as mistranslated, and translated 2 and 3 times, and stuff was put into those sacred texts.
I agree fully.
Stuff was taken out, and it was taken out of their cultural and historical context.
For sure.
Let's go with that. Let's use the one, it's the biblical prohibition that has been translated and interpreted to say that you shouldn't lie with a man as you do with a woman. Like, all right, well, let's look at that. Wait a minute. It doesn't say anything about women. And why was that? Because women were property. Women weren't even considered human at that time. Property. So who cared what they did in bed?
Yeah. Right.
And even today, like where you'll talk to, like some of the most homophobic, people that or like heterosexual men who say, "Oh my God, 2 women together, ooh, that's hot. That's they want to know more about that. They want to see that. They want to even maybe participate in that."
Sure.
But you put 2 guys together, it's like, "Oh my God, yeah, you gotta shoot them or kill them or
right. Something
so
crazy.
Is that? What is that? And to me, is that because subconsciously, of course, when 2 men are seen together, one of them is supposedly willingly giving up the quote unquote superior male status, which is profoundly threatening to the status quo.
Right.
And that's the reason that I think that male, homophobia against gay men is really the strongest. And because it is a very threatening thing to the way that we have all been doing culture and society in this planet. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times when you see the people who are really homophobic and it doesn't even necessarily make sense, I'm sure you've heard it said, well, these individuals have their own tendencies and that they don't understand and that they're scared of, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like that's the whole, thing about projection, the psychological defense mechanism, that we judge and make wrong something over there, but that is also in here.
Right, exactly.
So like when we go see a movie, we see the movie out there on that screen, but the source of it is really behind us, from that little projector. Right. So in the same way, and we can even apply this to our own relationships, not just about sexuality. The more that somebody does something that gets us upset, the greater the more clear it is that we also do that in some way.
Yep. It's it's all reflections, right? I always talk about that on the show. It's all reflections, and you don't see people as they are; you see them as you are, in a sense. And it's always somehow reflecting back some part of self. And if there's some sort of hang up with some external situation or person or event, it's a great opportunity to, especially as those of us, of course, listening to the show, we're all working on ourselves. We've taken with the plunge of, I understand I'm here for self-work, for self-growth. How can I start down that path? And I think a great piece of advice for anyone is if there's something that is triggering you, external of self, that is a great indicator to take a look within and see, how does that relate to something within you, right?
Yes. And it's very subtle, because the more advanced we go on that journey of spiritual awareness, the more subtle and the more insidious that little ego becomes. Yeah. But
it's a slippery little devil.
Oh my God, it's so slippery. But let's take like a really, really extreme example, like a terrorist. I can't imagine that anybody listening to this would wrap their body in explosives and go walk into a crowded mall and set themselves off. So that's really easy to externalize it, to make that about them, and I would never do that. Right. But if we ask ourselves, have we ever terrorized others emotionally? Have we ever terrorized ourselves emotionally? And of course we have. We're still, in most cases, still doing that. The way that we treat ourselves, the things that we say to ourselves, we would never say to somebody else. We are so
Right.
mean and so cruel to our own selves.
Right. Yeah, well said.
So yes, there is a terrorist inside of us too.
Right. And well, everything in the world that you see, I would venture to say is somehow a reflection of a part of self. We are very complex beings, right? And this whole world is a reflection of self in some way, shape, or form. And the more we can approach it, understanding, this thing over here, this terrorist is a extension of self, a part of self that needs healing, that needs greater compassion and understanding. And that's why I'm so fond of the John Lennon quote, "Love is the answer, now what was the question?" And it seems kind of cliche and all those things, but it's really true. It's like when you fully understand it's all an extension of self, and I'm approaching anything and everyone that I bump up against, especially if I bump up against it in my reality, out of all the possibilities and potentials, this thing, this person, this event is bumping up into my reality. It's very close to home in some level. So if you approach it as, everywhere I go, I'm there waiting for myself. And how do I approach it as how can I bring healing to it? It's a game changer in the terms of judgment and all those persecution and pointing the finger. It's always you point a finger and two are pointing back at you when you understand this, right?
Yeah. So true. That's ultimate truth.
Yeah. Well, to switch gears a little bit here, as you know, as the listeners know, probably what's coming, I love a good story of synchronicity or serendipity or a positive paranormal event, and hoping that you have something up your sleeve to share.
That is such a good question because I live that way. So there's so many.
I hear that as an immediate answer so often. Everyone on this sort of path, it's like, oh yes, which there's so much that happens, yet it's not something that we consider a normal thing in consensus reality, which is interesting.
Exactly. Because I think when we step into this, call it spiritual for lack of another word, realm, reality, way of living that's not that of the world or the consensus reality, as you say, or the ego mind. Mm-hmm. We're really stepping into a different reality, almost like a different world that has different physics and different laws.
Right.
So, here's one example. A few years ago, it's part of a longer story that we don't have time to get into, but I was basically tricked by the universe to come back to Florida after living 20 years in California, Northern California, which in many ways is like my spiritual base.
It's where I'm at right now, actually.
Yeah, is that where you live?
I live in Southern California, but I've been sort of on an extended stay in Lake Tahoe.
Wow. Yeah,
doing some work here. And I love it.
Such a beautiful part of the country. So anyway, I end up back in Miami, where my family is. So there was wisdom. I could see the wisdom of being back in Miami. I could see, that there's more need for me there for sure than there is in Northern California. And I'm doing much more work on the East Coast these days. But it's not what I would have chosen. It's not what I would have preferred.
Right.
So anyway, I rent a house, and the guidance was to rent a big house. I was perfectly content in a 2-bedroom apartment in Marin County in California. So I live alone. But the guidance was to create community, and that's a whole other story of how that came about. That was also full of synchronicity and a way. But so anyway, I ended up renting a big house because it had a huge meeting area where I could do workshops on retreats and offer breathwork, and began to create community down in Miami. And so within the first year, the owner places it on the market. And this was when the market was really bad down there. So nothing happened in the year. The second year, they showed it a couple of times. The third year, on the same day that in the morning, I get an email from the owner's realtor, letting me know that they had received an offer. That evening, in the middle of a breathwork session, with 20 people there, at the most quiet, most intimate point, bam, bam, bam. The boyfriend of one of the next door neighbors was, just irate and enraged because somebody had parked on their property. So At this point, I knew that it wasn't about that. I knew that we had outgrown the neighborhood because it become an issue. Parking had become a problem. And so I have 6 weeks to find another, and I call it a temple. I rent a house, but I call it a temple, and I treat it
like
as such. It honors all spiritual traditions, but with particular dedication to the sacred feminine. So I call it the Goddess Temple for the reasons that we were talking about before.
Love that.
And because I believe that the empowerment of women and the return of the sacred feminine in all of us is the single most important thing that needs to happen in the world right now. And that to that we can connect all the other issues that we face as a species. But anyway, so 6 weeks, 3 of which I'm already scheduled to be travel. The last week is Thanksgiving, where nothing happens. I was able to cancel one of the trips. The other 2 I couldn't. So I go to see maybe 10, 12 different properties and nothing. Like stretching to make it work and nothing. Like, in one case it went from yes to no, and then they came back and said yes, and then I came back and said the final no when I found the temple where I am now. So Thanksgiving week, and I'm like, all right, well, I guess we're not doing this. I guess I'm going to go nomadic for a while. I guess we're not going to do a temple right now. I have movers scheduled. I have those pods already scheduled. And on Thanksgiving Day, I go pick up a friend, so one place, and then pick up another friend in Coconut Grove, which is where I end up being now. It's the oldest part of Miami. It's full of old vegetation and trees. But parking, at least in the area that I was thinking of Coconut Grove, is not available. So I'm thinking, it's so sad. It's too bad that there's no parking in the Grove, because it's always been my favorite part of Miami. And I have that thought as I'm pulling up in to pick up my friend, and I'm texting him, and in that instant arrives a text from this beautiful young woman who had just completed a retreat. And her mother is a realtor. And so she goes, hey, I know that you're working with another realtor, and I know that it's Thanksgiving and that you're probably not even thinking about this, but I felt compelled. I felt driven to get on the computer and to look for a house for you. And this property showed up, and it's in Coconut Grove. And they just reduced it by $1,000. So the Coconut Grove part of it just got my attention. I said, all right, well, tell me that. And she texts me the address, and I know the street is like, wow, I would have never thought of looking there, because I would have thought those property were outrageously expensive.
Sure.
But I said, all right, but I'll play. And so, go to my sister's for dinner, come back and go see the house. It's like, oh my God, parking is not going to be an issue at this property. And so I said, all right, let's go see it. And so the next day she had to call the realtor 3 times because the owner, she says, the owner's already going to rent it to one of his friends. And so the 3rd time she goes, look, you don't understand. This guy's your ideal tenant, and this is his house. And so the woman laughed, and she goes, all right, come on Saturday. So on Saturday we go posse of 5, 3 beautiful women and my friend and I. And so I'm having a conversation with the realtor, in the front of inside, right in the foyer of the house, and I tell him my only concern is the noise from next door, because they do weddings and receptions. It's the same owner owns the house next door where they do weddings and receptions, and I said, I do meditation retreats. And turns out that the owner had Googled me, so he was intrigued, and for the first time came over to meet the prospective tenant. So we make the introductions, and he goes, look, I want you to be reassured that the music stops at 11. And he had just kind of overheard that conversation. He goes, and I want you to come over. The way that the music is located, you probably won't even hear it. That's not true. You definitely do hear it. But most of the time, it's beautiful and elegant and all that. So we go around the back of the house, and we run into a peacock. And not 2 weeks before, the last retreat I did at the previous temple, this woman, the realtor, and her mom, and I had a conversation about peacocks, because one of them was wearing a peacock shirt or something. And so we talked about all the spiritual symbolism of a peacock. And there's a peacock that, now eats out of your hands. We now have a temple peacock. And
that's too cool.
We keep on going to the center court. And, this is like a old Spanish architecture with a central court. And we run into my nephew with his fiance, now wife, and they're checking out the venue for their wedding, unbeknownst to me. And the story gets better. So they know two of my colleagues from breathwork already. And turns out that he knows Janelle, the realtor's daughter, from middle school. It's like, who makes this stuff up? Who has time to put all these players together?
Right.
And so suddenly, it's like
a family reunion all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's like everybody laughing. And the owner's like looking at me like, what's going on here? And I tell him, that's my nephew. And so I knew before. I knew at the handshake because I felt the energy exchange. But now at this point, there's no question. There's no doubt.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, wow, what a fascinating, cool story.
But I'm sensitive to our time.
Right. It continues.
It continues.
Wow. Well, that is, I love stories like this too, because it's one of those things, it's a great example of, hey, we're trying to make something happen. All of us do that. And that's sort of the dance that is this life. And as you start to understand how things work, we set intentions and we turn over rocks, so to speak, to find our place, to find our temple, right? But when it's not panning out, you let go, you release, let go of the expectation and the need. Yes. And then it's so funny because once you let go, all of a sudden it's like you're out of the way, your expectation is out of the way, and things can rearrange in such a unique way where, all these things happen, like this woman randomly deciding she needs to search for you. I mean, who does that, right? And
I know, it's crazy. And the rest of the story continues because it deals with trust. Like so many of us struggle with wow, how will I pay the bills if I really follow my heart's calling?
Right.
And so the story, I mean, the punchline of the story is that when we say yes to the soul's calling, that and like you're talking about, just let go of the attachment to the outcome. That we can count on the support of the universe.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
I ended up taking an extra $1,000 a month in rent, and yet within 2 months. I'm just giving you the punchline, not telling you all the synchronicities that went with it. But within 2 months, somebody who owed me $17,000, like one of his grandmother died and got some money, and that's the first thing he did. So clean that up. So wow. So that's the point that I'm trying to make to your listeners. Like when we say yes, it's a collaborative effort. When we're coming from that place of soul, from that place of mission. It's like, we don't have to do this alone. We are not doing this alone. And that it becomes a collaboration, a collaborative effort between us and the universe. Whatever that means to us, however we relate to and understand that. Right. And so I said yes, and I took on I'll take an extra $12,000 a year. Mm-hmm. And then the universe, whoever's, working the other side, is saying, all right, good.
No problem.
We'll see. Yeah. We'll see your 12, and here's an extra few thousand. Go buy some pretty things for the temple.
Right. Isn't that beautiful? I love that. And so often we're making judgment calls on there's not enough. And I need to say no because there's not enough. And when you put faith into what you're doing, the intention of what you're doing, and you say, I don't know how I'm going to tackle this additional responsibility, right? Financial responsibility in this case, but I trust and I have faith. And when you do that, I mean, I've heard so many similar stories where the money all of a sudden just appears from some obscure place that you don't even expect it to appear from.
Yeah, and it's like even before the 17,000, I was taking a bath at the old place because the new one doesn't have bathtubs, and I actually take baths from time to time as a energetic cleansing purification thing, especially when I do a lot of retreats and workshops and breath work. And so I'm having a conversation with the powers that be. He's like, all right, well, these are pretty strong signs, pretty powerful signs. And that's how I guide my life, so it's in this conversation with the universe. So I guess we're doing this. I guess we're going to get a new temple, and I'm taking an extra $1,000 a month, and I'm trusting that it's going to work out. And for me, that word trust feels a lot better than faith, because trust is like a deeper thing. It's like a sense of knowing almost. Right. Not like blind faith. It's like, I know.
Sure.
Like if I say yes, I know that somehow it's going to work out. And
I
so
like
get
that,
out of I get out of the tub, and there's a text from a woman who's been doing my work. And she goes, hey, I just wanted to, you first want to know that I got this huge promotion at work, and I know it's because of the work that I'm doing with you. And so I'm committing for the next year, I'm committing to $300 a month for the temple.
Wow.
And so, wow, great. And I was like, yes. And I only have to come up with an extra 700. But
Right.
more touching to me, more important to me is this conversation with the other side, which which I said, all right, I'll do it, and then they say, okay, all right, we got you. You're not doing this alone.
Right. Beautiful example, beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing, Christian. This has been absolutely awesome to connect with you. You have so much wisdom, and you can just hear and feel the calmness. That's the interesting thing about people that have done the work, that are doing the work like yourself, that I always notice. Getting the opportunity to connect is how grounded your energy feels and how calming it feels to interact with you. So I know that is translated, as you talked about with the handshake. It's the same type of thing, right? Energy knows no bounds. It's moving over the airwaves as listeners listen to this once it's released, and it's going to have an impact. And so I appreciate the impact that you're having, not only on myself, but on those listening. I do have one final question I'd like to leave you with. And before I get to that, what is the best way for listeners to follow your work, to connect with you if they're interested in a retreat? Through your website?
Yeah, the website, soulfulpower.com, and get on the email list. And then I send out, periodic reminders of when the retreats are and how they can get involved and register and all that good stuff.
Excellent. So my final question I like to leave off with, to end with, in 60 seconds or less, what is the meaning of life according to Christian de la Huerta?
Oh, that's a great question. I think to be the most that we can be, to fulfill that unique human potential that only we can do. There isn't anybody out there that has the same genetics in this universe or any other universe that has the same genetics, that has the same set of experiences that make us who we are. If we don't give full expression to that, nobody else is going to do that.
Yeah, I love that. What a great, profound and simple perspective. Christian, thank you so much, my friend. It is an honor. I look forward to connecting with you at some point, and I'd love to come and join one of your workshops. And until then, journey well, my friend.
I would love that. And thank you so much. I feel strong connection with you. I'm very grateful to have connected with you, and look forward to doing that in 3D. And thank you for doing the beautiful work and the beautiful service that you do for all of us. It does make a difference.
Thank you so much, Christian. I really appreciate you, my friend.
All right. Blessings.
Well, everyone, that concludes this week's interview episode. If you have enjoyed this positive download from our hearts and minds to yours, please take a minute, give us a rating or review on iTunes. Since iTunes is the holy grail of all things podcasting, your good reviews help us to reach more listeners. Also, we would be extremely appreciative if you would tell your friends and family about the show. Our sincere intent with the Positive Head podcast is to spread positivity to the world because we're selfish, quite honestly. I say that jokingly, but really only halfway joking. I'm referring to the good kind of selfish based on the knowing that we all get what we give in this life, because when we give, we're actually always giving to extensions of self, since we're all really one in the same consciousness, just in different bodies. So if you want to be a good selfish along with us by helping to spread the positivity, by all means, please proceed to shout about the Positive Head podcast from your rooftop. Otherwise, as you continue on your fabulous journey in this 3D reality, be sure to remember this. As long as you ain't dead, you're already positive ahead. Journey well, everyone, and thank you for being.